We're now in lesson number 23 in the book of 2 Samuel, and we are over in chapter 21 of that book of 2 Samuel. And you know, at the end of the last lesson, after David had dealt with the problem of the Gibeonites, there came this problem with the Philistines again. And this time it was with a giant. Why? Because it seems like there always is some sort of giant on the way, no matter what is going on. You know, we think we come to the end of our life and we think things are going good, and lo and behold, some big giant event comes. Well, for David, it's really and truly a giant. So we come to David's great recapitulation with a fight with David's last giant. Yes, the first thing was a giant, and now David's last fight for the nation of Israel will also be a giant. Here in verse number 15, we hear this. Now when the Philistines were at war again with Israel, David went down and his servants with him. And as they fought against the Philistines, David became weary. Then Ishbi-Benob, who was among the descendants of the giant, the weight of whose spear was 300 shekels of bronze in weight, was girded with a new sword, and he intended to kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, helped him and struck the Philistine and killed him. Ishbi-Benob, as a descendant of Goliath, intended to kill David and actually fought with David. But David was just too frail to conquer this giant alone. Abishai came to the aid of David and helped him kill him. And interestingly, David won the nation's admiration when he was about 17 years of old in a battle with the Philistines when he killed Goliath, the father of Ishbi-Benob. The battle with Goliath was at least 48 years before this point in the story, maybe even a little longer. And now, near the end of David's life, the Philistines were once again invading Israel. Now, the Philistines had invaded the land and killed King Saul on Mount Gilboa. That was 38 years before. And from there, the Philistines stayed in the northern part of the Promised Land during the 2-year reign of Saul's son, King Ishbosheth. Now in 2 Samuel chapter 4, Ishbosheth was murdered and David became the king of Israel. And when David was anointed king of all Israel, the Philistines moved to kill David. And in 2 Samuel chapter 5, the Lord approved for David to attack the Philistines, to subdue them. That's 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 19. And David struck down this swath of Philistines from Geba to Gezer. That's 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 25. With its defeat, David decided it was time to bring the Ark of the Covenant back from where it was stored 20 years before. And after that, the Philistines attacked Israel again, and David subdued them and took over their capital city of the Philistines, requiring them to pay tribute to David and to Israel each year. 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 1. Okay. The Philistines stayed in line from that point on under David until this point in the storyline of our text today in 2 Samuel 21. The Philistines lived too close not to have heard about the decade-long trouble David had been having in the nation with Absalom. The Philistines lived too close not to have known about the 3-year famine that had weakened the whole nation of Israel. And David's age was against him. He was at least 65 years of age at this time, maybe a little more. He will serve as king no more than 5 years from this point on. His age had made him weary, lacking the strength to fight a battle, especially against a giant. And what did David's army think about that? 17b tells us. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, "You shall not go out again with us to battle, so that you do not extinguish the lamp of Israel." Now, because of the battle with Ishbi-Benob, the giant, the nation had realized, saw David fighting, and determined that David was just too weary to continue fighting the giants or go into any further battles with Israel. He had become frail. And even with that determination, the nation wanted David alive as long as he could live. What a blessed honor bestowed on David by his men by this decision. They implied that they did not want David to die in battle and extinguish the lamp of Israel. That phrase was a natural metaphor for the Jews, meaning to change the light of prosperity into the darkness of calamity. Well, David was the Lord's blessed anointed king. And that had been proven over and over through the way the Lord protected Israel under David's leadership. And Israel had prospered all under David's leadership. But with a change in leaders, Israel knew of the threat of the calamity that might come with a new king. They had forced the Lord to give them Saul as a king, and the nation suffered continuously under Saul's leadership. The Lord had warned them about what Saul would do, and he did it. Saul did what the Lord warned, and the nation suffered. But with David, things were different. We are taught in the Bible that the Jews were particular about their history and their heritage. 1st and 2nd Chronicles proves that point. Those books hold a second list of the genealogies found in Genesis chapter 1 all the way through the book of Malachi. And when Matthew and Mark comes along, the genealogies of Jesus' line are given also. Well, why are genealogies there? Well, the Jews had a need to know who they were and to whom they were related, and they valued the importance of their history. David was the brightest light in Jewish history since the death of Joshua. Israel fears the point in this passage where their lamp of King David is extinguished. More than anything, they feared the future, and rightly so. Keeping David alive meant extending as long as possible the blessings they had experienced since David was anointed king of all Israel. Old and weary, David was still the king whom the Lord spoke with and directed in leading the nations. Well, in 1 Kings, we learn that Israel had a right to fear the death of David. Solomon will do a terrible job as the king of Israel, and the Lord will be so angry with him that if he had not been the son of David, I should say, the Lord would have ripped the kingdom out of his hands. 1 Kings chapter 11 through 12 says this. So the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you, and you will give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Oh, what a prophecy. And it came true exactly as the Lord said it would. But David's last fight with the giant did not mean the fights with the giants were over. They wanted David dead. They were going to keep coming. The Philistines were going to keep coming. There always seems to be a giant in the way, or more than one giant. And we come to David's last giants as the 4 descendants of Goliath continue to come after Ishbi-Benob. And they come in different battles, folks. Who will continue the fight with the Philistines against Israel? Here he is. Verse number 18, the giant named Saph will be the next giant coming to kill David and destroy the Israelites. Verse number 18. Now it came about after this that there was war again with the Philistines of Gob. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite struck down Saph, who was among the descendants of the giant. There always seems to be another giant in the way. Another Goliath will be next to be killed in the battle at Gob. Verse number 19, it's another battle, it's another giant, another descendant of Goliath. But this one's named Goliath also. Then there was war with the Philistines again at Gob. Then there was war with the Philistines again at Gob, and Elhanai, the son of Jair-Oregim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Now we need to explain the name Gob. Now when the compiler wrote 2 Samuel, this town was known as Gezer. When Ezra wrote the Chronicles, it was known as Gob. The two places are the exact same place. Now let's explain something else too. The word Gittite, as we have found out before, is the same name as Gath. Gath and Gittite are the same place, depending on when the record was being written down. Therefore, Goliath the Gittite was the same as Goliath the Gath. Now, 48 years earlier, David had killed a different Goliath the Gittite of Gath. That was the one that David killed at 17 years old. In 1 Chronicles 20, 4 through 8, we find that Elhanan had killed the Goliath the Gittite, and this Goliath the Gittite was named Lami. Now in the third battle with the Philistines at the city of Gath, Israel fought a huge man, verse number 20. Then there was war at Gath again, and there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he also had been born to the giant. When he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, that's David's brother, struck him down. Hey, we are not told the name of this strange-looking giant with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. We don't know his name. We just know he was a huge man. Nevertheless, David's nephew, Jonathan by name, killed him. Okay? Jonathan. David had a nephew named Jonathan. Killed this strange-looking man with huge man. 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. Here we have the first mention of David's nephew named Jonathan for the very first time. Now the compiler then summarizes the victories over these giants in David's last battles with the Philistines. Verse number 22 says this: "These 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants." So let's name these 4. The 4 giants were Ishi-Benob, Saph, Lami, and the unnamed giant with 6 fingers on each hand and 12 toes, okay, with 12 fingers and with 12 toes. What started with the battle of the giants during Saul's reign has concluded the active life of David's reign in the battlefield. He would no longer attend the battlefield with his warriors as king, as the people were accustomed to him being right there beside them in each battle. David would no longer go out to war. Neither would he face conflict with his enemies from the countries around him that surround Israel, or from those who had remained loyal to King Saul and Saul's descendants. No, that is not going to happen any longer. David must have felt that he had finally seen all the troubles in his reign and overcome them. He had overcome all the troubles he had seen, but there was yet one more trouble in his family that would come all because of his sin with Bathsheba. But the compiler will address that trouble when we arrive at the opening of the 1 Kings. For now, peace has come to David, and the introduction to the Psalm of David's great liberation in chapter 22, verse 1 begins and says this: "And David spoke the words of this song to the Lord in the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul." Now this psalm is also recorded over in the book of Psalms in chapter 18. Now verses 2 through 50 are over in chapter 18. A few words here and a few there have been translated just a little differently, but the word changes do not affect the meaning or the intent of David's thought. Now chapter 18 verse 1 is not found in our passage here. Over in chapter 18 verse 1, David begins with, "I love you, O Lord, my strength." That's not in the 2 Samuel passage here. It's over in the Psalms 18 passage. But by this time in David's life, he clearly recognized that the Lord was his strength, and by extension, his success as the king of Israel. For that, David loved the Lord. Nevertheless, those words are not in our passage today, but the rest of the Psalm 18 is right here in our text. Let us begin with awe as we see the thoughts of old David, who has seen his last public battle with foes outside his family and outside of his dreadful decisions. First part of this psalm is about David being a satisfied worshiper. Second, it will be about David being a satisfied warrior. And finally, we will see David as a satisfied witness. We begin with David's words as the satisfied warrior here, chapter 22, verse 2. He said, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold and my refuge, my Savior. You have saved me from violence. I call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. I am saved from my enemies. For the waves of death encompassed me. The torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of Sheol surrounded me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called upon the Lord. Yes, I cried to my God, and from his temple he heard my voice, and my cry for help came into his ears." Chapter 22, verses 2 through 8. David had finally come to the place in his life where he had seen it all, heard it all, and been through it all. No matter what was said about him, what battles he faced, or what sin he had committed, he had an unfailing trust at all times in the Lord. David knew what it was to be surrounded by violence. He knew what it was like to have waves of the possibilities of his own death flood across his mind, his heart, his soul from every direction. He knew what it was like to be overwhelmed by the torrents of destruction that overwhelmed him and just covered him up. He knew what it was like to feel like he was bound by the ropes that would drag him to death. He knew what it was like to show the traps had been set for him. He saw those traps. He knew all these kinds of distresses with which he had lived. What was his answer to each distress? It was simple. He said, "I called upon the Lord. Yes, I cried to my God." In short, David worshiped the Lord by looking to him, by latching on to the Lord like one would latch on to an immovable rock to hang on until the winds and the waves and the torrents of life passed. But more than that, David would hide in the stronghold, the cave of the Lord, hidden away in the Lord as a refuge, a place of safety from all that encompassed him, overwhelmed him, surrounded him, and tried to trap him. The world without the Lord can never understand the peace that can come to one's soul, flooding your soul in such times until they run to Him one time, find His protection one time, and trust Him one time as a satisfied worshiper, that the Lord is there to answer. David said the Lord answered when he said, "And from His temple He heard my voice, and my cry for help came into His ears." For those of you who have believed in the Lord as your Savior, you too need to become a satisfied worshiper by trusting Him, and trusting Him enough to reach out to Him in your time of need. He will hear your cry. All through David's life, enemies and trouble abound. But because David was a satisfied worshiper, he was also a satisfied warrior. Every time David faced trouble, he called upon the name of the Lord. And in so doing, once he had heard from the Lord, he would proceed in the will of the Lord to triumph. David knew at this point in his life There was a public life of triumph and a private life of triumph. We begin with his public life of triumph. Verse number 8. Then the earth shook and quaked. The foundations of heaven were trembling. They were shaken because he was angry. Smoke went up out of his nostrils. Fire from his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. He came down with thick darkness under his feet. And he rode on a cherub and flew, and he appeared on the wings of the wind. And he made darkness canopies around him, a mass of waters, thick clouds of the sky. From the brightness before him coals of fire kindled. The Lord thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice. And he sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning and routed them. Then the channels of the sea appeared. The fountains of the world were laid bare by the rebuke of the Lord. And at the blast of the breath of his nostrils, he sent from on high. He took me. He drew me out of many waters. He delivered me from my strong enemies, from those who hated me, for they were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my support. He also brought me forth into a broad place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. What a great public statement about how the Lord led David. Even in 1 Samuel, during the reign of King Saul, David never lost a battle or suffered the loss of any one man beside him in battle, because the Lord fought the battles from heaven, quaking the fountains, billowing smoke, heaping coals of fire, covering with darkness, pushing the waters, thundering with his mighty voice. All the forces of heaven protected David from strong enemies and from days of calamity. The Lord led David to the broad places to protect him because the Lord delighted in David and his worship, and the protection helped make David a satisfied warrior of the Lord. When the Lord fights your battles, you tend to lean on him to fight your battles. You learn to get out of the way. Let him be him, and use his powers to bring you to triumph because you belong to him. As King David saw the public life of triumph, but now we come to David's private life of triumph in verse number 21. The Lord has rewarded me according to my righteousness. According to the cleanliness of my hands, he has recompensed me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord and have not acted wickedly against my God. For all his ordinances were before me, and as for his statutes, I did not depart from them. I was also blameless towards him, and I kept myself from my iniquity. Therefore the Lord has recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanness before his eyes. With the kind you show yourself kind, with the blameless you show yourself blameless. With the pure you show yourself pure, and with the perverted you show yourself astute. And you save an afflicted people, but your eyes are on the haughty whom you abase. For you are my lamp, O Lord, and the Lord illumines my darkness. For by you I can run upon a troop. By my God I can leap over a wall. As for God, his way is blameless. The word of the Lord is tested. He is a shield to all who take refuge in him. For who is God besides the Lord? And who is a rock besides our God? God is my strong fortress, and he sets the blameless in his way. He makes my feet like hinds' feet. He sets me on high places. He trains my hands for battle, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. You have also given me the shield of your salvation, and your help makes me great. You enlarge my steps under me, and my feet have not slipped. I pursued my enemies and destroyed them, and I did not turn back until they were consumed. And I have devoured them and shattered them so that they did not rise, and they fell under my feet. For you have girded me with strength for battle. You have subdued under me those who rose up against me. You have also made my enemies turn their backs to me, and I destroyed those who hated me. They looked, but there was none to save, even to the Lord, but he did not answer them. Then I pulverized them as the dust of the earth. I crushed and stamped them out as the mire of the street. David understood the Lord has rewarded me according to my righteousness. According to the cleanness of my hands, he has recompensed me. Focus here on the word according. It means to match or to correspond. When David acted righteous, the Lord rewarded David for his righteousness. When David was clean, the Lord rewarded David for his cleanness. When David followed the way of the Lord, he was rewarded. When David did not follow the ways, he was not rewarded. In this whole section on the private life of triumph, David does not say that he did everything right and cleanly. Nay, he says, when he did things right and clean, he was rewarded in triumph. Take note. Conversely, David knew full well that when he was out of the will of the Lord, he would not be rewarded. He sinned with Bathsheba, and the timely death of their first son was a testament to that point. David knew that the public triumph with his men depended on his private righteousness and cleanness before the Lord. His righteousness and his cleanliness would protect the nation of Israel from all the enemies and troubles. His righteousness and cleanliness would thwart the success of all David's and Israel's enemies, and they would be crushed, pulverized, he said. David's private triumphs as a satisfied warrior would provide for Israel's public triumphs, safety, and security. Finally, we come to David as a satisfied witness, verse number 44. He was not thinking about the past at this point in the psalm. He was thinking about his renewed position as the king of Israel when he returned to Jerusalem from the debacle with Absalom. The compiler did not tell us about his life as king after returning, but David did here in these following few words, verse number 44, as we begin. You have also delivered me from the contentions of my people. You have kept me as head of the nations. A people whom I have not known serve me. Foreigners pretend obedience to me. As soon as they hear, they obey me. Foreigners lose heart, and they come trembling out of their fortress. The Lord lives, and blessed be my rock, and exalted be God, the rock of my salvation. The God who executes vengeance for me and brings down peoples under me, who also brings me out from my enemies. You even lift me above those who rise up against me. You rescue me from the violent men. Therefore, I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the nations, and I will sing praises to your name. He is a tower of deliverance to his king, and shows loving kindness to his anointed, to David and his descendants forever. When David says to the Lord, you have kept me as head of the nations, he indicates the timing of this psalm when it was written. While still in Mahanaim, David wondered whether the Lord wanted him to continue being king at all. He wondered about the people wanting him to continue being king. He wondered about all the surrounding nations and what they thought about him continuing to be the king. But David had the answer. He was still the king because the Lord wanted him to be the king. He was still the king because the people had made the decision that they wanted him to be the king and rid the nation of his last enemy within. That's the rebel of Sheba that we talked about. He was still the king because the Lord had helped him defeat the Philistines again and all the last giants that he had faced. The nations feared the renewed rule of David as king because of how they reacted to David after he returned to Jerusalem and in the following days, months, and years. But why did all of this happen? It was because of the Lord, David's rock, his fortress, his salvation, his God, his Lord. David admits that the Lord had raised him up, rescued him, returned him, protected him, and for that David gave thanks for his deliverance and gave the Lord praise for his loving kindness and for his anointing and to all of David's posterity that would follow. We know his posterity will lead to Jesus, one of his descendants, the earthly Jesus. The same Lord that David was writing this psalm to is the one who will one day come in the flesh to be the long-awaited Messiah. Well, David's not through with his psalms, his songs. He has another one in him, and that will come in our next lesson, another song of David.